coming up. With a month over, this is a really exciting lesson. And now I'm actually able to see what you see and just go ahead with that. There'll be a little buffering. Um, and there's also a little weirdness with the tab there, which I really don't like. So I'm going to go ahead and move this down and transition this over so that it's not in the way. There we go. Um, it looks like the buffering's a little better. I've got to get that down to about a little lower for it to work, but this should go ahead and work. So what's really neat about this is that the broadcast that I did with vocab has gotten responses. And so I've gotten some kickback, but I like it because it's all going to fit in with the objections. So I'm getting the objections I'm going to tell you about uh, actually from that video related to atonement. And so you're going to get to see some of those objections. So we're already like having dialogue going on. In fact, I even invited some of the folks that were giving me the objections to come on. I didn't know whether they'd be courageous enough to come on or not. But they're going to end up. Hey, good to have you on, Nashon. Roxby, it is always a pleasure to have you on. And I'm so excited you can join us. Um, you know, Nate, I thought about bringing vocab on, and what we did is we used his computer, but he was actually on my channel. So that's just a matter of he uses a different software. Um, and you said more. I didn't see the more till just now. Um, Yeah, we have slightly different focuses, but we're going to end up. I should have some footage from the conference. And what I'll do is I'll do that as a premiere. So you guys will actually see what happens during the Doctrine on the Block conference. So I've sort of arranged that. He's going to show me how. We don't have enough high speed at the church to broadcast the Doctrine on the Block conference live. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my segment and maybe a few others, and then what? Well, I'll definitely get mine. I'll be allowed mine. Okay, I don't have any copyright infringement there, and then I'm going to preview that. So we're going to see what we can end up doing. Um, but we're already getting responses. So I love it. So you're going to see some of the responses, and the responses tied more into tonight than they did into the segment with Rabbi Asher. So we're going to examine blood atonement. And there are really enough objections that we could do 2 shows, especially because of some of the objections these guys brought out. So let's get going here. There will be a little buffering. Yeah. Roxby, that's a copyright. I don't have permission for the other guy's stuff, so we'll have to see what we can do. But I'm hoping to connect with them, and maybe I can even have them on my show, or I can be on their show, and we can do some cross work, kind of helping with each other. So let's look at some of these exciting, I only use the guy's first name. Deals is obviously not his name, okay? But Daniel sounds like he's Jewish, and I'm thinking I might be getting him and pulling him in. So I left his last name out for the sake of being a gentleman, because I really like to be that when I can be. So here's what I got from Deals here. You're completely out of your mind. Isaiah chapter 1 says very specifically that God has no use for blood sacrifices. What he does want is righteousness from humans. That means good deeds as specified in the Torah. You pagan Christians, get that, claim to derive your righteousness just by believing in human sacrifice like the pagans did. Where is that belief found in the Torah? So this is like honest kickback. So I love it. Jeff, now this one's more interesting. Daniel took a different tact with me. Daniel, as a learned Jew, do not know that Leviticus 17:11 does not cite the requirement for blood sacrifice. Now his comment's actually longer, and that's why I say there'll be a room almost virtually for a second show on objections, because he actually went a little further and listed several objections. But I thought I'd deal with what I could deal with tonight. Now, if you're Facebook, again, you can't see the PowerPoint, but the PowerPoint is indeed downloadable. So you can actually see these 2 objections because they're in the PowerPoint. So let's start talking about this. And by the way, guys, I will try to read up on OBS and figure out where the glitch is, because I really do want to schedule these. But I'm getting a software incompatibility, so need to deal with that. Okay, so let's talk about tonight. We're gonna intro blood atonement, and then we're gonna talk about blood atonement in. Someone has a suggestion. Okay, yes, I bet it does sound familiar. I bet these type of objections have come up with a certain friend of Becky's that we both know very well. We're going to talk about blood atonement in the Torah narrative. Then we're going to talk about blood atonement in the commandments. Then we're going to start talking about Jewish objections. We're probably not going to get to the rabbis changing blood atonement. That could be part of that other show where we deal with more objections and talk about the rabbi's right to change it, which is they don't have one, but we'll talk about that just briefly, maybe in the next show. So I might divide and conquer here. And then we'll talk about God's answer. And we're probably just going to reiterate that, because I think that's probably the most important part here. I'm going to be addressing this when I address Islam too. Both Judaism and Islam don't like blood atonement anymore. In fact, that's one thing that they have in common. And so when I'm dealing with Islam, I have to deal with it differently, but I have to deal with blood atonement. And my thing is, we're making much of Messiah in the big story. Well, you can't understand the story of Scripture without blood atonement. There is no way to be able to do that. This is this is like the spine of the story. Hey, shout out to Star Blaze who just came on. Good to see you tonight. Um, and so this is like indispensable, absolutely indispensable. And so we're going to talk about it in the narrative first. Now, I'm going from the narrative from Abraham. This goes back before. When we're talking about blood atonement, we're talking about substitutionary atonement. We're not talking about, going to the blood bank and getting a pint. You guys all know that. But I want to make it clear that vicarious atonement is blood atonement. It just wasn't, the word vicarious just wasn't used. Now, I went to one of the most important scriptures, and I keep going back to that because this is one of those scriptures that appears in the Jewish prayer book, and this is the Akedah. We all know the story. The reason I call it the Akedah is that's the Hebrew word for binding, and that's what this passage is called among Jews. It's the binding of Isaac. Um, and so, um, you know the story. Now, I didn't include all of 22. That's a lot of scripture. But when you get to this part here, they're trudging along. Abraham's got the two guys. Isaac's carrying the wood for the fire. Okay? And he's getting the idea that there's one thing missing here. The thing that's missing is the actual sacrifice. So it's dawning on him that, wait a minute, here's the fire, here's the guys. Um, there's a problem here. Um, and so he says, my father, here I am, my son. That's, you know, pretty typical. Look, the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb? So he's catching on here. Now, the rabbis say he was probably in his teens or 20s, and Abraham was quite an old man. So he's going along with this. And Abraham, my son, said, God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering. Now, at this point, Abraham doesn't know that he's not going to sacrifice his son. So this is almost virtually prophetic. And so the two of them went together and they came to the place that God had told him. And Abraham builds the altar there, places the wood in order, and he binds Isaac. That's where the Akedah comes in. By the way, Isaac allows himself to be bound, which is absolutely incredible if you think about it. And he binds his son, he lays him on the altar, and stretches out his hand. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven. This is in reference to some objections I really got about the angel of the Lord this week. The angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham, and he says, yes, I'm here. The knife is literally in a downward movement at this point. And here I am. Do not lay your hand on the lad or do anything to him, for now I know you fear God, since you've not withheld your only son from me. Talk about foundations for the Trinity, but that's not where we are tonight. Abraham lifted up his eyes. It's one word. The lifted up is a particular word in the Hebrew. It's the second time he's lifted up his eyes in the narrative, by the way. But we won't preach that passage tonight. He looked, and behind him a ram was caught in the thicket. And so Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up. This is the Akedah. This is the binding of Isaac. This is a central text in Jewish thought, right? And this is before Sinai. This is before the law, okay? Now, here's what's so interesting. The rabbis really pay attention to this passage. We are your people, the children of the covenant, the children of Abraham, thy friend, whom did swear on Mount Moriah, the seed of Isaac, his only son, who he bound to the altar, the congregation of Jacob, the firstborn son, whose name thou did call Israel, and Jeshurun, by reason of the love therein which thou hast loved him, and the joy wherein thou hast rejoiced in him. Now, I know that's kind of wordy, and I stuck the Hebrew up here, but here's the important thing. The rabbis focus on the binding of Isaac and the fact that the lamb replaces Isaac. That's why a ram's horn is blown on Rosh Hashanah, right? Now, if you go to the Exodus, which is still, by the way, before Sinai, they tie the substitution of the ram for Isaac with the Exodus. The Midrash is the interpretation, or the when I see the blood, I will pass over you. Now, what is that the blood of? That's the blood of the lamb. The blood of the binding of Isaac. How could they say it was the blood of the binding of Isaac? Because the ram substituted for Isaac. So the ram dying in his place as if Isaac himself died. And when I see the Passover blood, I will remember the substitutionary sacrifice made for Isaac way back when, and I will accept this substitutionary atonement also. And that's the point. Passover is centered. Now, Passover is before Sinai. Passover is still celebrated to this day by Jewish people. No lamb is killed. Okay? Which, by the way, means, again, you have a real problem following Torah or the law. A lamb without blemish, a male. Notice, Isaac was a male, the ram was a male, the lamb of Passover is a male, Messiah is a male. There's this typology going on here. There's this picture going on here. On the 14th day you shall kill it at twilight. You shall take some of the blood and put it on the doorposts. Well, why? Why? Because I'm going to judge the firstborn, and when I see the blood as a sign on your doorposts, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not destroy you, which I strike the land. Okay? What was substituted for the firstborn sons of Israel? The lamb. Substitutionary atonement throughout. Substitutionary atonement for Isaac. Substitutionary atonement for the Exodus. Now, we haven't even gotten the law yet. Okay? Now, I could have gone back previously, but the point is this idea of substitutionary sacrifice was built in. Now, it's going to get applied more directly to atonement in the law, but the point is it predates Sinai. The principle of substitutionary sacrifice is built into the Torah narrative. That's why I say this is up and down the whole spine. This is key to understanding the big story of Scripture. And yet Judaism is now repudiating it. Look at that guy's comment that I'm crazy. I have this crazy idea about blood atonement that is nowhere in the Scriptures. Okay? Now, the other comment was, this is not really what Leviticus is about. This is not a Torah command. That's all God really wants is good works. So let's see if that works, okay? I'm going right to Leviticus. Now, we're going to talk about the context here, because he's objecting to the context. In his longer argument, he points out real quickly that Leviticus 17:11 is not about blood atonement. Okay? For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I've given it you upon the altar to make atonement for your souls. It is the blood that makes atonement for the soul. Now, right before this is the dietary laws about not eating blood. So someone would say, okay, you're sort of pulling this out of context, Jeff. Well, no, I'm not pulling this out of context. Because the reason they were not to eat blood is because blood was reserved for atonement. So yes, it's in the dietary laws. That is the context, but it's the reason for not eating blood in the dietary laws. In other words, blood atonement provides the reason for the kosher law of not eating blood. That is the reason for that kosher law. And so if you go further up, it talks about not eating the blood, and then it goes into Leviticus 11. And since the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I've given it to you to make atonement for your souls, don't eat blood. It's reserved for something else, because it represents the life of that animal. Substitutionary atonement. I stuck the Hebrew in there because the language is clear. Look, how do you say, I have given it, God speaking, upon the altar to make atonement for your souls, if blood atonement is not what he wants? The word give, and you probably can't see the cursor, um, is right at the bottom. If you go to the bottom and you look at the second break, oh, there it is. Look at that. There's the word forgiven. Okay. I moved away, but I'm coming back into town here, and it'll catch up. And it's the word given right after that word. There you are. It's the word given, Natan. It's the word we get Nathan from. And it, by the way, in some instances means appointed. But we'll be nice about this. We'll give it its general meaning of given. God gave them blood upon the altar. Now let me see if I get the cursor to the last word. There's the last word, so you can see the word atonement here. And it'll take a minute or two to catch up. It may take longer than a minute or two. There we are. That's the word for atonement. That's the word kippur for atonement. The letter there at the beginning of the last three letters means for or for the purpose of or for the sake of. So God literally says that he has given for the sake of atonement blood. Now my friend here is saying that's not what God wants. Well, this is Torah. Now he points out there are a bunch of other sacrifices. I'm not going to touch that yet. But the bottom line is the Torah language is pretty clear. Pre-Torah examples of substitutionary atonement are key throughout the stories that occur before the Exodus. But here's the cool thing. If you're talking to a Jewish person, the Jewish writings back this up. Look at this. The question came up, is the wave offering, is it the wave offering that makes atonement? Now, my friend there who objected, Daniel, said, well, there are different types of offerings. That's right, there were. And so the Talmud asks, is the wave offering that which makes atonement? And the Talmud very clearly says it is not. Is it not blood that makes atonement? As it is written, it is the blood that makes atonement by reason of the life. Quoting Leviticus 17:11, which Daniel says is not about blood atonement at all. This is Yoma 5a. And it literally says, well, the wave offerings, which is a different type of offering, doesn't make atonement because there's no blood. In fact, this is the thing. The requirement for blood atonement was changed by Yohanan ben Zakkai, but look at what happens here. This is an early tractate. This is Berachot. Simply means blessings. It has to do with prayer and the recitation of prayer. Look at this. Not surprising, some of the Talmud rabbis, fully aware of the magnitude of the destruction of the temple and the disastrous consequences, stated that since the temple was destroyed, the gates of prayer are closed and there is an iron wall between God and his people. Oh, you mean this wasn't important? They're horrified. They're absolutely, completely horrified. Well, why? Why, my dear friend Daniel, if blood atonement is not needed, were the rabbis themselves horrified? So now we get to the prophets. By the way, this answers Rabbi Asher because blood atonement is required in the Torah. Now, we could talk about repentance as being important too. But this is a common objection. Do you know one of the reasons that God said to go to Pharaoh and ask for their release was so that they could offer sacrifices? Exodus 5:3, let my people go that they may go into the desert and make offerings to me. So the Exodus is actually tied to the making of offerings. That's a little weird if God didn't care. They're described as a pleasing aroma to the Lord. By the way, that's not the way I would picture blood and something being burned. And look how many times. By the way, again, this is pre-Sinai. This is pre-Sinai. That's after Sinai. So now let's talk about this reaction here I got from Deals. He said, "Look, you are a crazy person. You are a nutcase. Don't you know that the whole purpose of Isaiah chapter 1 at the beginning was to state that God never wanted blood sacrifices?" Well, okay. So let's pull it up. I took 11 through 13 because that's the section he's really talking about. To what purpose is the multitude of your sacrifices to me, says the Lord? I've had enough of your burnt offerings of rams and fat of cattle. Oh, sound is low? Thank you, Star. Let's bring that up. Okay. Uh, you know, the fat of fed cattle. I do not delight in the blood of bulls or of lambs or of goats. When you come before me, who has required this from your hand to trample my courts? Bring no more futile sacrifices. Incense is abomination to me. New moons and Sabbath, the calling of assemblies. I cannot endure iniquity and the sacred meeting. Let's see what's really going on here. I cannot endure iniquity and the sacred meeting. In other words, your insincere following of the sacrificial system means nothing because it is not done the right way for the right reasons with the right heart. By the way, that's true of anything, isn't it? If we go to worship with fellow believers, followers of Messiah, and we do it with the wrong attitude, does it matter? Isn't that true of any exercise of spirituality that we conduct? If we do it without real sincerity, does it matter? The Jews do have a term for this. It's called kavanah. It means intentionality. Okay? And so the language is very clear in Isaiah. It's not about sacrifices in general. It says, bring no more futile sacrifices. Iniquity and the sacred meeting. Not the sacred meeting itself, not what he commanded, but futile sacrifices. In fact, a careful study of the 5 books of Moses, there are more chapters devoted to the subject of sacrifices and offerings or substitutionary atonement than other subjects, such as the Sabbath, high holy days, idolatry, adultery, murder, theft combined. Pretty weird if it's not something God wants that all this time would be spent on it. Obviously, my friend Deal there is not reading Isaiah fairly. He's focusing on a few language things there, but he's ignoring the larger picture. Whoop. There we go. Let me get that up. Malachi. Yep. Rebecca hit it right on the head, but all you guys are thinking the same thing. By the way, it's interesting that the detractors did not bother to actually show up. I would have loved to have them in on this, but let's look at this here. Malachi is the last of the prophets before John the Baptist. I don't know if you realize that or not, but he's really the end of the Old Testament prophets, right near the end there. Look what he says. This is interesting because he's emphasizing sacrifices. He will sit as a refiner and purifier of silver. He will purify the sons of Levi. The sons of Levi, the priesthood. Why is he going to do that? And purge them as gold and silver, that they may offer to the Lord a offering in righteousness. Then the offerings of Judah and Jerusalem will be pleasant to the Lord, as in the days of old in former years. So here I am looking at Malachi, the last of the prophets before John the Baptist, who really is the last Old Testament prophet. And I'm looking at this, and as I look at this, Malachi emphasizes the sacrificial system. So nothing Isaiah says or Malachi says takes away from the importance of sacrifices at all. I always point this out. I did this with Daniel, okay? This is really important. Jewish people pray in the Amidah for the restoration of the temple all the time. Now, I don't know if they're always thinking about it. Oh, Rebecca, I can put a verse list up after the broadcast and put some of those verses up. They're in the PowerPoint, but I can put a few of those up. So thanks for the reminder there. I will go back to that slide at the end and work on that. This is interesting that you will rebuild the holy temple speedily in our days, so we may offer up the continual offering, that it may atone for us as you prescribed in your Torah. Here's the Amidah, which is still recited today by Jewish people. I think it's 3 times a day, connecting atonement with the sacrificial system. So, how does that work? Okay, one of the comments is other means were accepted. Now we have Yoma 5a, but I'm going to just jump because one of the big things that Daniel harped on was the grain offering. And he said, well, there's grain offerings. Okay? See, there's grain offerings, Jeff. There were other types of sacrifices. Well, first, other types of sacrifices weren't, not all sacrifices were for atonement. There were different purposes for different sacrifices. So you can't say just because there were other sacrifices. But Dr. Brown gives a good answer to this. Okay, there is the grain offering in Leviticus 5:11 through 13. But pay attention to where the flour is placed. So I'm going to go to Leviticus 5 through 11 here because even though flour doesn't bleed, altars can have blood on them. So let's see what's really going on here in Leviticus. If he's not able to bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, then he who sinned shall bring an offering of 1/10 an ephah of flour as a sin offering. So what Daniel's saying is, look, this is a sin offering, so it seems to bear some connection to atonement, but there's flour that you're given if you're too poor. And he makes a big thing out of this, right? He shall bring it to the priest, and the priest shall take a handful as a memorial and burn it on the altar according to the offerings made by fire of the Lord. It is a sin offering. The priest shall make atonement for him, that he is committed in any of these matters, and shall be forgiven him. Now, see, what people are going to go to is they're going to say, well, wait a minute, flour doesn't bleed. This is a sin offering. How do you get around this? Where is it put? On the altar. What was put on the altar before? The blood sacrifices. The only difference is if you're too poor to afford an animal sacrifice, God allowed the blood of previous sacrifices to provide the blood atonement for your grain offering when it was given as a sin offering. That's all that is to it. It's just God being even more gracious, but not God removing the requirement of blood. He's just providing the blood for those who were extremely poor. And there you go. Nowhere does it ever say that grain makes atonement. So now someone's going to go to Exodus 30:12 through 17, and talk about that. And they're going to talk about the offering that was made for the census. There was a census taken, and God said an offering had to be collected, but the offering wasn't a blood offering. So I'm going to turn there real quick, and we're going to look at this together, because this is a favorite objection. So I'm going to Exodus right around 12 here. The ransom money. Okay? You shall take a census of the children of Israel by their number. Every man shall give a ransom for himself. When you number them, that there be no plague among them, every one among those who are numbered shall give a shekel according to the shekel of the sanctuary, a shekel of 20 gerahs, and the half shekel shall be an offering to the Lord. Every one among those who was numbered from 20 years older and above shall give an offering to the Lord. The rich shall not give more, and the poor shall not give less. then half a shekel. Then you will give an offering to the Lord to make atonement for yourself. What sin had they committed? See, we're not talking about blood atonement for sin. So now you're saying, well, what's going on here? Okay. Well, the word atonement can mean covering. And so there's no sin being cited here. There's no atonement for sin being given. There's a covering being given in relationship to the census as an event. Now, do I know exactly why this is happening? Well, I don't necessarily know exactly all the ins and outs of why this is happening, but here's what I do know. It's not an atonement for any sort of trespass. They weren't sinning by taking the census, they were told to take the census. David sins later by taking a census, which he is not supposed to take. So the answer is this is not atonement from sin. This is some sort of kippur covering, but it's not a covering for a definite sin committed by the community or an individual. Here's an interesting one. Now, I've never had this one played on me before, but Dr. Brown did. I can't believe the death of Jesus paid for my sins because the Torah teaches for the blood to be effectual, it had to be poured on the altar in a specific way. This doesn't refer to Jesus. Jesus suffered outside the gate, which, by the way, Hebrews makes much of. Okay? Well, there are times when the blood was not poured on the altar and it was still acceptable. So let's look at a few of these. David spoke to the Lord when he saw the angel was striking the people and said, "Surely I have sinned." So David realizes he sinned. By the way, this is in connection with a census that he shouldn't have taken. I have done wickedly, but these sheep, that's referring to the people of Israel, by the way, not to sheep. What have they done? Let your hand, pray, be against me and my father's house. And Gad came, now Gad's a prophet, came to David and said, "Go erect an altar to the Lord on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite." And so David did according to the word of the Lord. Now let me stop there. He offers an offering and the plague stops. So God accepts his offering, which is a blood atonement offering for his sin on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite, using a handmade altar that David himself built, but was not the altar. By the way, David was not a Levite. The only one who could offer blood atonement sacrifices in the tabernacle and later in the temple was a Levite, and yet David himself does this, and it's perfectly acceptable. Now let's talk about the famous thing with Elijah. This one's really good. Elijah is taking on the priests of Baal. Israel is in sin, by the way. They began to follow Baal. That's idolatry and synchronism. And that's totally wrong, right? Elijah takes 12 stones according to the tribes of the sons of Jacob. So he builds an altar with 12 stones representing the 12 tribes, 12 sons of Jacob, the tribes of Israel, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, "Israel shall be your name." Then with the stones build an altar in the name of the Lord. He made a trench around the altar, 2 selahs, enough to hold 2 selahs of seed, but that's not what he puts, fills it with. Then he put the wood in order, cut the bulls in half, laid them on the wood, filled the water pots, poured it on the burnt sacrifice. So he douses this whole thing. And what ends up happening? Fire comes down from heaven and accepts the blood offering, the burnt offering, the blood atonement offering for the sin of the children of Israel, in corporately allowing Baal worship. That's in Kings. Does God accept the offering? Yes. Was it done on the altar in Jerusalem? No. Was it done by Levites? No. Now, it's all that's necessary is to do righteous stuff, right? Well, interesting enough, the Talmud makes some interesting comments. Some would say, now one of the objections was human sacrifice. Remember? I might be able to go back and get the slide. But remember the objection at the beginning here. And I want to go back to it. And I don't usually do this, but I'm going to do this. Let me go back to this important objection. Here we go. And I'm going to start from a current slide here for a second. I have to do this for just a second. Now you're going to see a blank screen, but I want you to get a feel for this, okay? Because here we go. You pagans / Christians claim you derive your righteousness just by believing in human sacrifice like the pagans did. Is that what we really believe? Is that what we really believe, in human sacrifice? So let's talk a little bit about this, okay? Let me get there. Is that what we really believe? Human sacrifice? No, that's not what we believe. If it were merely a human being being sacrificed without volitional acceptance, in other words, if we took somebody and sacrificed them, that would be inappropriate. That's not what we're talking about. First of all, we're talking about the fact that God himself came in human form. This is God offering himself. I like to see someone take issue with that. That's highly significant. It's also Jesus laying down his life. Remember, Jesus is very clear that he's allowing himself to be killed. So that's not what we're talking about. But here's a neat little Talmudic passage here that's really cool. The Talmud teaches the death of the righteous atones. Mitatan shel tzadikim mikarparet. Sorry, mikaperet. The death of the righteous atones. We have Jesus the righteous who atones for us. And so this is not us believing in taking innocent people and sacrificing them for atonement like the Aztecs. Not one little bit. This is the belief that the blood of the righteous atones, particularly if that is God in human form. In other words, we believe God took upon himself the debt, that he took all evil into himself and redeemed it by being victorious over it through a vicarious death for sin. We do not believe in human sacrifices. Well, as we get towards the end of this, here's the cool thing. The main concepts which Christianity believes, it inherited from biblical Judaism. And I'm going to make that comment. Nobody, remember who the first disciples were. They were practicing Jews. There was no way on earth that a Saul of Tarsus who was trained by Hillel's great-grandson is going to believe in mere human sacrifice. But he could believe in Messiah's death, which was prophesied, and he could believe in blood atonement because that was clearly the understanding of what was required for sin. We move from the lamb which replaced Isaac to the lamb which replaced the firstborn sons of Isaac to the lamb that takes away all sin in Isaiah 53:6. But wait, that's just a Christian interpretation of Isaiah 53. No, it's not. Because the rabbis originally understood Isaiah 53 as referring to Messiah. Now, there may have been some dissension, but here's the whole thing. The primary thought of Messiah being a suffering servant ran into trouble as the emphasis became on Messiah as the coming king and victorious Messiah, and so they couldn't reconcile the two, But the prophets had no problem, and the Talmud indicates that the idea of a suffering Messiah was not new, but was very much alive during the intertestamental period. This is a whole conversation on what Messiah's name will be. I'll take that one in a minute. Okay. Um, Menachem, the son of Yitzhak, is his name. The leprous of the house of study is his name. Verily, he has borne our diseases and pains, and he is carrying them. We thought him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. And the Talmud's actually quoting Isaiah 53:4. I'm going to take that as a question when we finish, Beck. Um, okay. This is cool. This is Raphael Patai. Some of you have this book. It's a real worthwhile book. Um, I can put it up on the list again. Now, this is a Zohar. Now, you got to be careful here because this is Kabbalah, and Rabbi Asher would be having a fit and saying, see, but it's still there. And so I'm going to still make use of it. As long as Israel dwelt in the Holy Land, the ritual and the sacrifices they performed in the temple removed all the diseases from the world. Now Messiah removes them from the children of the world. And you can find similar passages that are not in Kabbalah. So I hope that answered some of the objections. We are not crazy people. Not at all. What we believe is very much in line with the big story of God. You remove the sacrificial system and you destroy and misrepresent the big story of God. Your friend, Becky's friend, does not like Paul. That's not shocking. I'm going to put that previous one up for you, Becky, in just a minute. Becky's friend doesn't like Paul very much. I'm going to get to that sweet aroma. You know what? Anti-missionaries hate Paul. They can't stand him. In fact, they're reclaiming Jesus as a good rabbi and fine scholar, but still resisting Paul. Paul talked a whole lot about justification by faith, and that just doesn't fit very well. Um, my answer to that, Becky, is prove he didn't. If you're going to make that claim, what historical evidence makes you think that he didn't study under Gamaliel? Question the premise. If someone makes the claim that someone absolutely didn't, then say, well, why is that not possible? They need to be able to, if say something absolutely can't be, they need to go ahead and explain why it is not so. And so I'm finding that sweet aroma passage here so I can put that up and get those for you. I'm going to copy these over and I'm going to put them right in here so that you can have them. But it really, he can say anything he wants. I could say the moon's made out of blue cheese, but that doesn't make it so. And so, saying it isn't enough. Why couldn't he have studied? His excuse is that Paul lied. Again, what evidence do you have historically that verifies that Paul lied? I could turn and say, well, you're lying. You could say, well, what if I just accused you of lying? You have to be able to verify a claim. By the way, the Torah talks against slander. A real challenge to him would be if you can't prove Paul lied, you're slandering, and that's a Torah sin. You have to be able to prove that. Because slander is a sin, and you're slandering someone who's dead, who isn't around to defend themselves. And so if you don't have a basis for making that claim, you may be guilty of sin according to the Torah. You better be able to back it up. And by the way, there are plenty of sound Jewish historians, and maybe I need to do a little bit of work for you, but I think there's more than one Jewish historian that will admit that Paul indeed studied under Gamaliel. And so I might be able to pull a few references for you and actually get them to you. And then you can go ahead and say, well, wrestle with these Jewish references, which is absolutely fine. Well, I'm sorry about the glitch. I'm glad we were still able to do this tonight. It is going to be a real crazy week, but I am really hoping. By the way, since I'll be speaking at the Muslim conference, I hope to get that on tape. Some of that will be repetition, but the training session on answering Islam, even though it will have some of the same ideas about wrong method, and wrong God, and it's material on my website, I still think it's worthwhile to have it packaged that way because I'm going to be discussing, basically the mass difference between us and that, and really how it changes the worldview, hopefully, and discussing kind of that. So it gives a basis. So glad that's a neat idea. Becky, I'll check some of my Jewish study sources and I'll see whether they are willing to historically, try to get you some citations. Hey, Roxby and everyone else who hung in there, thank you for finding me live after the glitch. I really want to make this work. Vocab has a better program, but he had to pay for it. So if I ever get to upgrade, it would be great to have the program that he has. But right now, OBS is pretty good. It just is having trouble handling this little hiccup. So, well, I kind of hoped a few of my detractors would actually come on, but they didn't. So, hopefully, I'll get more feedback and maybe they'll actually tune in and watch this. But we'll see what other input we get. I must say one thing, when Vocab comes on my channel, the viewership goes up a little bit. He's got some really cool things he does, and he knows how to jazz it up. Thanks everybody for being here. Until next time, shalom, shalom, and we'll post. Excellent. Thank you, Roxby. It is always a pleasure. Thank you, Nashon, for coming on. I don't know if you're able to stay with us, but it was great having you. Did I not do Nate? Thanks for hanging in there. Star, it has been great. This is like the second week, maybe more, but I've seen you on again. It is good having you with us. Well, good night, and may God bless.